particularly after the announcement soon. Nā reira ki te tonu mai te iwi, we will hear more from our expert panel and their reactions to the announcements from the government very shortly. Engari, aia nei me tahuri aroro rā, te tirohanga ake ki te whare pāre mata kei reira etahi o ngā kairipuata o Te Ao Māori News, and joining us now is producer of Te Ao Māori News, koe te tahi o ngā kaihautu, ara ko whatetiri te wake. Engari tuatahi me huri atu ki te motu whānui, te mea kei reira whatetiri, ki a te tiro ake rā tātou ki te arawa waka, te arawa tangata, te arawa tahua, a te kawa pāora no te ratonga o Aukaha News, reporting from Rotorua. A ka huri te aro ki te tai haua uruku rei tangara wā ko tini waka, ko ki te rā kūtou. Kei reira kei ngā motu, kei New Plymouth, we have Aroha Broughton Pue. Ki te papa i oe a ia nei nā kātū te manawa i a Regan Paranihi with Te Reo o Te Uru is there in Palmerston North. A ko Shakaila Andrews Alapaki no Tahu News, kei te Waupounamu, kei o tautahi ia nei. She'll be bringing us updates from the South Island. We'll hear their stories and get their regional insights as Budget 2025 unfolds. Engari, kei te taiwhanga pāpāho o whakaata Māori, etahi atu kai kōrero, kei te ki te rā kūtou i etahi. We have our reporters in the studio at Whakaata Māori joining us as well. Our Te Ao Māori News reporters, Riria Dalton-Reedy, Michael Cugley and Maioha Pānapa will be talking to the regions of Te Tai Tokerau, Te Matua Māui, Hawke's Bay and Te Tai Rawhiti East Coast regions respectively. And outside Parliament with all the action, we also have our reporter Jess Tyson from Te Ao with Moana joining us as well. Also down on Wellington, we have two other reporters. We have Whatetiri Te Wake, as I mentioned earlier. They are in the lockup and have been for the last 4 hours, getting all the very latest. Whati and the new political reporter for Te Ao Māori News, Mani Dunlop, who we will cross to in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at the exclusive results of a survey done by Whakaata Māori for this budget. He mea whakahaere tēnei te tauranga ai purangi i te rāwiki. Let's take a look at the first 4 questions put to the Māori community. To get a page or a gauge of the survey, the gauge of the mood in the Māori community as well, respondents were asked whether they feel that compared to a year ago, their life is getting harder, staying the same or getting easier. The overwhelming picture is that Māori feel life is getting harder. He watakau mātahi ōrau e ki ana he papatoi ake, he pēre nuku ake, te tau, tērā i te tau kua pahure tata ake nei. E waru ōrau e mea ana he rite tonu, e rangi ko tahi ōrau noi hoi ki ana, he māmā ke tēnei tau, tērā i te tau kua pahure tata. Males feel slightly less negative, as do respondents who own their own home outright. We then asked respondents how concerned they are by a number of social issues. E whā ngā take matua I puta. Tō mua ko te ora o te Māori. He oi ko tawata tauan o tērā, ki te taha o te ora o te ohaoha a tangata. Whāia ko te hauora, kei te waru te kaumā ono o rau te nui, ko te uara o te hoko whare tērā kei raro tata. Ko te taia o te kaupapa tuarima, kei te hirikapo o te Māori, he whitu te kaumā waru o rau te tatau. Closely followed was looking after the elderly, the state of education, employment opportunities, and lastly, crime, sitting at 62%. When we put the same question to rangatahi, the results were not too different. Ko te ora o te iwi Māori tērā e mātāmua ana ki ngā whakaaro rangatahi. Whāia, ko te taha o haua o te tangata. Ka toru, ko te hoko whare. Ko te pātai tua whāia he pēhea nei ngā whakaaro ki ngā mahi poroporo hei whakaora I te tahua o te motu. Te tiro e te iwi, he waru te kaupa mā whitu paiheneti o te ao Māori e mea ana kei te huarahi he te kāwanatanga e haere ana. E rima I ra toru ōrau e mea ana ai, the budget cuts are necessary to pay down overseas debt. Nō reira, me pere te tiro I ae nei ki te whare pāre mata auahi kai pōneke rā, kei raroi ho te kāwana kei reiro hoki a Jess Tyson I tēnei wātunu. As mentioned, Jess has been out on the ground outside Parliament where protesters from unions are represented. Jess, tēnā koe, hea nei ngā kōrero o te wā?
Tēnā koe, Julian. While everything has been happening inside the Beehive, out here on Parliament grounds, we've seen thousands of people unite. So they're from representing unions, workers, wahine Māori, wahine Pākehā, tāne, hundreds of people coming to just call for equal pay. And now it comes after the government earlier this month made sudden and controversial changes to how pay equity claims can be made after amending the Equal Pay Act. So what this basically meant is that it halted all current pay equity claims and is making it harder for people to make new claims. There's been a bit of a buzz here, I would say. There's been Cook Island drums, there have been people holding placards with really important messages, but some of the most, I think for me, the best part or the most prominent part of have been some of the heartfelt speeches said from people from the unions. So we've had people from the PSA, the Council of Trade Unions, and also Te Pāti Māori leader Debbie Ngārewa-Paka had a really heartfelt speech. And I think the message here is that wahine need to be treated, equally. They are such hard-working people within the public and private health sector, especially within health, and and especially nurses have come up a lot within the kōrero. So it's been a good time, but it's been a really important time and important messages that have been spoken about. Tēnā koe.
Jess, tēnā koe, ia rā kōrero. Thank you for that coverage again. Jess, outside Parliament, where, as you can see, there's a cacophony of noise and a crowd of people protesting outside Parliament now. Kia hatia e ngai wiki a mawhiti atu rā tātou ki te ana o ngā raiona I aia neina. Let's take you now to the parliamentary chamber, to the debating chamber, where we are about to hear the budget statement presented by the Minister of Finance, here, the Honourable Nicola Willis. E te iwi, whakarongo mai.
Estimates Bill be now read a first time.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The party vote is called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
With 34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed.
Appropriation 2025-26 Estimates Bill, first reading.
The Appropriations 2025-26 Estimates Bill is set down for second reading immediately. The Honourable Nicola Willis.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Appropriation 2025-2026 Estimates Bill be now read a second time. Ahumairangi, tangi te keo, tu te ao, tu te pō, te whanganui a tara, te karu waitai, piata maina. Kei oku nui, kei oku rahi, nōku, te honorei, ki te whakamunu, I te tahua, mō te tau nei. Tēnā koutou katoa. Mr Speaker, as I said in Te Ao Māori, it is an honour to announce this year's budget. This is a responsible budget to secure New Zealand's future. It supports the economic recovery now underway. It also takes a longer-term view, with initiatives to boost future investment, savings and growth. It continues this government's investment in health, in education and law and order. And in a challenging global environment, it provides funding to boost New Zealand's defence capability. And it does all of this within an expenditure track that reduces government spending as a share of the economy, returns the government's books to balance and bends the debt curve down from going up to going down. The economic outlook presented alongside this budget is a bright one. After a tough few years, growth, jobs and wages are set to rise. The government is not promising that today's budget will solve all New Zealanders' problems. But we do promise that the decisions we are taking now will set our country up for a better future. Mr. Speaker, the creation and delivery of an annual budget is at the heart of strong and stable government. And this budget is a team effort. I want to acknowledge and thank the Associate Ministers of Finance, David Seymour, Shane Jones and Chris Bishop, for their ideas and their advice. They were heavily involved in putting this budget together, as was the Prime Minister, whose leadership and wise counsel was invaluable. Thank you, Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, in recent years, New Zealanders have battled through an extended period of high inflation, high interest rates and low growth. And we know that times remain tough for many Kiwis. The good news today is that with strong economic and fiscal management, our recovery is underway. The recovery is being supported by lower interest rates and strong export performance. And over the next few years, the government's new investment boost policy, which I will come to shortly, will have a positive impact on growth. Recent tariff announcements have created uncertainty and volatility around the world. And for a small trading nation like New Zealand, the global situation is concerning. It doesn't threaten the recovery, but it does threaten the pace of the recovery. The Treasury has pegged its forecasts back and downside risks remain. Despite this, budget forecasts show economic growth picking up to healthy levels once again. Real GDP growth is expected to accelerate to 2.9% in the next fiscal year and 3% in the year after. Growth matters. It means more jobs, higher incomes and opportunities for families to get ahead. And over the forecast period, wages are expected to grow faster than inflation, and at the end of that period, there are expected to be 240,000 more people in jobs. Mr. Speaker, the government's books have taken a hammering over the past 6 years or so. Spending has risen sharply, so has government debt. The budget deficit left by the previous government is structural. It is not simply due to the state of the economy. In other words, the last government was living beyond its means, loading up the credit card to pay for things New Zealand couldn't afford. And this did real damage to our economy, as a massive spike in the cost of living led to high interest rates and low growth. This government is taking responsibility for cleaning up the mess. And under our fiscal management, government debt will stabilise, then start to come down. And our control of spending creates room for monetary policy to respond with lower interest rates. There is no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that fiscal consolidation is challenging. Some would do it with higher taxes. Well, that would burden New Zealand workers and businesses and scare away talent and investment. It would put our economic recovery at risk. This government is taking a different approach. We are getting the books in balance by controlling growth in government spending. The operating allowance for budget 2025 is $1.3 billion on average per annum. This is the lowest allowance in a decade, significantly down from the $2.4 billion allowance signalled in the budget policy statement in December. That reduction of $1.1 billion goes straight to the bottom line. The government's headline operating balance indicator, OBGAL-X, is $1.1 billion better each year on average than it otherwise would have been. And in addition, the Treasury estimates that the tighter budget package will see interest rates being 30 basis points lower than they otherwise would have been by the end of the forecast period. Importantly, that $1.3 billion allowance is a net figure. On the one hand, it encompasses $5 billion a year of new investment and $1.7 billion a year for tax reductions through investment boost. On the other hand, it contains savings of $5.3 billion a year. Now, these savings are the result of ongoing efforts by multiple ministers, and I want to acknowledge you all today. We take seriously our roles as custodians of taxpayer money. A significant portion of those savings come from changes to the pay equity regime. The changes were made to ensure future settlements stick to correcting pay discrepancies that arise from sex-based discrimination and not for other reasons. Making those changes means the government can repurpose $2.7 billion a year on average towards budget priorities like health, like education and law and order. That $2.7 billion had been put aside in contingencies for what, under the previous regime, were expected to be very wide-ranging pay equity claims, increasingly divorced from the sex-based discrimination that pay equity is supposed to be about.
Koe rā te minita take pūtea, Nicola Willis, e whakapuaki ana I te Tahua 2025. Let's now go to our karere, kai kawe kōrero whatitiri I te wake. Kua puta mai ia I te ana o ngā raiona me ngā tatauranga. He was in lock-up, kei aia ngā raraunga kōrero o te wā e pā ana ki te Tahua. Whatitiri tēnā koe e hoa, hea hai ane ngā kōrero e mauna I a koe nā?
Tēnā koe, Julia, no tira tēnā tātou I runga I tēnei rā nui. Aha koe he rā nui tēnei, e hara I te mea I nui te pūtea I taka I hoki te iwi Māori. Me te mihi hoki ki te minita, nōna I timata tana kauhau I te whare paremata I te ahia hinei me te reo Māori, engari anō he pūtea mo te reo Māori. Heoi, kia te tira ke tātou ki wetahi o ngā whika I puta I te rānei. I tino ki te ngā pūtea, ka taka iho ki te ao pakihi. Me te mōhio koira te aronga o te kāwanatanga ki te whakapiki ake I te ohanga o Aotearoa, mā te hanga whare, mā te hanga mahi hoki te rā kaupapa e tutuki I a rātou. Engari anō ki ngā kaupapa Māori, I roto I ngā taukuakaha ki te tātou I ngā tahua pūtea nui rawa atu mo te iwi Māori, hakua whānau ora mai, ko hanga reo, te reo Māori, ahatu, e harai te mea I tino kite I e rā momo pūtea I tēnei tau. Engari, ko te kohanga reo tērā, I whiwhi I wetahi pūtea, I whiwhi I wetahi pūtea mō ā rātou take hangarau me ki, kamatu ko te ropu wahine Māori toko I te ora, me ngā wātene Māori, I whakawhiwhia ki ngā pūtea, te kaumā toru miriona tāra. Nō reira, I mihia rātou te minita e Shane Jones I tēnei ahiahi, no Aotearoa tuatahi e rā pūtea I kimi, I tutuki I a rātou hoki. Heoi, I tu atu I tērā. Mō ngā take kōti, me ngā take taihara, tōna whārau, 80 miriona tāra, ka tuku atu ki ngā ratonga, putanoi Aotearoa, hei whakatika I e raru me te mōhio koira tētahi o ngā tino aronga pea o tēnei kāwanatanga. E Jules, I tu atu I tērā, kei te hanga anini te mātenga, kei te cross-eyed hoki ngā karu me te mōhio, kua rua haora mātou, wetahi o ngā kai pāpaho o konei, e tiro haere ana ki ngā whika.
Whati tēnā koe, hoanorere kia toa ake au I ngā kōrero I puta. He pūtea kua tukuna ki te kohanga reo, take hangarau nei. He pūtea kua tukuna atu ki te ropu wahine Māori toko I te ora, taku mahara ki mai koe te kaumatoru miriona tāra, me ngā wātene Māori ko tahi miriona tāra neke atu. Atu I tērā kāre koe te tino ki te etahi atu hua nui, hāngai hito ki te ao Māori, ne?
Kei te tika koe, e Jules, me te mōhio, I roto I te pukapuka o te tahua, ka kite te tangata I ngā pūtea hou, ka tuku atu ki ngā ratonga, ne? I roto hoki I te pukapuka, I kite ko ngā pūtea I pena hia e te kāwanatanga. Nō reira, mō ngā take, mō ngā kaupapa whare Māori, me te mōhio, ara no atu ngā rōpū pēnei i a toi tū tai rāwhiti rātau e hanga whare ana, e hoko whare ana mō a rātau iwi. Kua reprioritised e rā pūtea. So kua tangohia tōna whārau miliona tāra mai i ngā kaupapa mō ngā kāinga Māori, kua reprioritised e rā pūtea. Kua kite tātou i roto i ngā kaupapa maha katoa te kāwanatanga, mehe mea he kaupapa Māori o roto, kua neke hia e rā pūtea ki puna ke.
Whati tēnā koe i rā kōrero, tēnā koe i rā mahi hō miro, i kanohi hō miro rawa koe, nā ua noi whakatewhete ngā kōrero katoa, me hi atua nei hoa, kore kua kōrero no tāu a koe nei. Nā reira tēnā koe i rā whakapuakitanga. So there you have it, whatetiri te wake. Again, just saying, ko hangareo, pūtea, for technology, Māori Women's Welfare League, 13 million. Again, the previous budget announcement for Māori wardens, over 1 million. 485 million for court services, and a reprioritisation of what was dedicated funding to Māori housing initiatives put back into the wider pool at an estimate whati there said of 400 million. Let's now go to Jess Tyson, who, as we saw earlier, was outside Parliament. E kōrero anei ki te tehi atu o ngā member pāre mata nui o te wā, e kore kahore whakarongo wana ki ngā kōrero a te whakapuakitanga o te minite i ai anei. Let's now cross to Jess Tyson, outside te whare Pāremata.
Kia ora. Now I am here with Carmel Sepuloni, the spokesperson for women from Labour Party. Why are you here today?
I am here today to stand alongside every wahine across the country that is getting screwed over by this government.
And why do you think it's so important that people have come here today on Budget Day?
Well, we only just recently had it announced that pay equity was being scrapped by the government. Effectively on Budget Day, women and men are out here today to express their disdain and disgust at the fact that effectively women of Aotearoa are paying for anything that's in the budget today.
How harmful was this specifically for Māori and Pacific?
Particularly harmful for Māori and Pacific women because the gender pay gap that exists is more pronounced, more prominent for Māori and Pacific women. Māori and Pacific women earn the least in this country. Pay equity is one of the ways in which we can close that gender pay gap, but that has been scrapped by this national government coalition.
Now, I understand that today they're supposed to be explaining how they're going to, enact these changes. What are you hoping to see come from that?
Well, there is nothing that I could hope for that we will see in this government because they have already announced that they are scrapping pay equity. They've already changed the legislation. Sadly, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more legislation, more policy changes that disproportionately negatively impact women. And when policy changes or policy negatively impacts women, you can guarantee it's going to be even worse for Māori and Pacific women.
I also understand that unions were, blocked from going into lockup today, and everyone here, I feel like there's a big prominence or group of unions here. What are your thoughts on that, the fact that they were being blocked out?
Well, I mean, this is a government who don't like to listen to other people's points of views. They only want people in the room that are going to agree with them. They have locked out the unions because the unions have been so strong in opposition to what this government has done with pay equity and the offence they have caused against women in this country. That's not a reason to lock out unions. Unions are the ones advocating for workers and for our women.
Well, thank you so much for your kōrero, and I hope that the rest of the day goes really well.
Thank you so much.
Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Jess, talking there to Carmel Sepuloni, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. Kia āmoko whiti atu rā tātou i aia nei ki te kaikawe pūrongo tōranga pūhou o Te Ao Māori News. We take you now to Mani Dunlop. She is now part of the Te Ao Māori News crew who have been in lockup. Mani, tell us your views. He hei anei ngā kōrero e mauna i a koe, e puriti ana e koe.
Tēnā koe, Jules, o te rā, tēnā tātou katoa. Yes, well, the Minister of Finance said yesterday that this was a budget that will ensure that Māori will thrive, but looking through the numbers today, Jules, I can tell you in our audience, I can't really see how that would be. Obviously, we've seen the Māori Wardens and the Māori Women's Welfare League be the only new spending as part of the Māori Development Vote in particular. However, there's been quite a lot of money taken from kaupapa Māori initiatives across all votes. That includes housing, education, crime, courts such as Te Ao Māori program, that's been given a massive decrease as well. And a lot of that being reprioritised into more kind of universal funding that will contribute to other areas and the agenda essentially of this coalition government. I mean, it is on brand. It's on brand of this government to not have specifically Māori focused initiatives and instead taking a lot of that money, and arguably you could argue over $700 million taken from Māori focused initiatives and reprioritised. When we questioned the Minister of Finance on that particular point, she rejected that characterisation and believes that as part of this budget of economic growth, it will contribute back to Māori and ensure that they do thrive, as she said.
Mani, as you said, $700 million taken from Māori-specific funding, now to a much more universal approach, which, as you said, was on brand. Is there anything else in the budget that surprised you or that gave you a different perspective on what we've seen out of the budget? And we'll go back to the Minister soon. But is there anything that shocked or surprised you out of the announcement today?
Not particularly. I mean, it is unsurprising that there hasn't been a huge amount of investment on anything significant for Māori. I mean, she did say in the budget lockup that there was about just over $1 million put into Hauora Māori services. However, when you look at the numbers and crunch them, she said that twice, and I did follow up on, can you please elaborate on what that $750 million you're saying is going into Māori health? And when we looked at the numbers, it's actually just a cost pressure adjustment, which goes in from Health New Zealand, and about $38 million of that is new funding. So in terms of health, there is a little bit of an injection there, but it was really hard to find, and you really had to dig in the numbers in order to find that. I think surprisingly, the really intentional overreach essentially of taking about $388 million from Māori housing specific initiatives to go into the flexible fund to ensure kind of that a better approach to housing. The Minister for Housing, Minister Bishop, did say that a lot of that is not necessarily ring-fenced or guaranteed that it will be allocated to Māori, but he did assure us and us in that question that actually, you know, it will come back eventually, and a lot of the contestable funds will be available to iwi, and a lot of the already established relationships and MOUs with the government and agencies will stay in place in regards to housing.
Mani Dunlop, the new political reporter for Te Ao Māori News, tēnā koe, thank you for those insights. As she just said, there's $750 million to Hauora Māori services, although new funding of only $38 million, $358 million of specific housing funding initiatives for Māori now put back into a universal fund, the flexible fund for housing, which Minister Bishop said will come back in some way, shape or form. Let's now go back to the Minister of Finance, the Honourable Nicola Willis, with her budget statement in the House.
The new default rate will grow faster than they do now, providing a larger balance at age 65 or when people come to buy their first home, building the financial security of New Zealanders. Savings from changes to the government contribution, which total $2.5 billion over the forecast period, are being used to fund other budget priorities, including health, education and law and order. Mr Speaker, a number of Budget 2025 initiatives deliver targeted cost of living support. These include fiscally neutral changes to working for families to better target it at low and middle income families who need the support most. From 1 April next year, the government will raise the family income threshold for working for families to $44,900 a year and increase the abatement rate slightly to 27.5%. As a result, families with incomes just above the new threshold will get an extra $23 per fortnight from working for families, with this additional support reducing gradually as family income rises. In all, an estimated 142,000 families with children will receive $14 more per fortnight on average, and the vast majority of these families will have incomes below $100,000 a year. This will incentivise working families and give them support when they need it most. The cost of this extra support is met from better targeting the first year of the Best Start tax credit. From 1 April next year, the first year of Best Start will no longer be universal, but will be income tested the same way the second and third years already are, with payments ending completely when a family earns just over $97,000 a year. As a consequence, there will be families that receive less financial support than they otherwise would have, but the vast majority of those families will have incomes over $100,000 a year. The change to Best Start only applies for births on or after 1 April 2026, so no family will see an actual reduction in their payments. And as a mother of 4, I can point out that we are giving prospective parents more than 9 months advance notice of this change. Mr. Speaker, another cost of living initiative relates to prescriptions. Getting a prescription for only 3 months at a time can be frustrating, particularly for people on stable long-term medications like asthma inhalers, insulin for diabetes and blood pressure tablets. Getting a repeat prescription costs money and adds paperwork for doctors. Now, from the first quarter of 2026, New Zealanders will be able to get 12 months prescriptions for their medicines. That will save Kiwi medical costs and it will give health professionals more time to deal with other patients. The budget also helps up to 66,000 additional Super Gold Card holders pay their rates. From 1 July this year, the rates rebate scheme will become more generous for Super Gold Card holders and their households by increasing the income abatement threshold to $45,000 a year and increasing the maximum rebate to $805. These changes originated from the National and New Zealand First Coalition Agreement and will come as welcome relief to many ratepayers. Mr. Speaker, the biggest part of this budget is investment in the frontline services Kiwis rely on. And I want to take members through some key areas of new funding. First, let me clarify that when I talk about additional funding, I'm referring, unless stated otherwise, to operating funding over the next 4 years plus capital funding. I will start with health. Budget 2025 makes a capital investment of more than $1 billion in hospitals and health facilities. Funding has been allocated for a major redevelopment of Nelson Hospital, including a new 128-bed inpatient building. And in what is great news for the people of Nelson, the new inpatient building is expected to be built by 2029, 2 years earlier than originally planned. Funding has also been allocated for a new emergency department at Wellington Regional Hospital. In addition, Wellington Hospital will get new specialist treatment spaces, an expansion of the intensive care unit and a refurbishment of the old Children's Hospital. The budget also funds health infrastructure projects at Auckland City Hospital, Green Lane Clinical Centre and Palmerston North Hospital. And in terms of operating funding, the budget confirms a funding increase of $5.5 billion for hospital and specialist services, primary care, community health and public health. This will support Health New Zealand to make progress on the government's targets for more timely care, including shorter waiting times for hip replacements, cataract surgery and other elective procedures. Budget 2025 confirms funding of more than $1 billion to buy and deliver additional cancer treatments and other medicines that Pharmac has announced over the past 12 months. And the budget provides new funding of $447 million to support increased access to primary care, including urgent care and after-hours services across New Zealand. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to something close to my heart. Giving children a chance to reach their potential through the power of a good education is one of the greatest gifts that a government can bestow. And to my mind, Improving the results we get from our education system is the single most important thing we can do to improve the future productivity of New Zealand. New funding in Budget 2025 of $646 million operating and $101 million capital is the largest boost to learning support in our generation. Improvements to our learning support system are overdue. It is a system that has become characterised by inequity, underfunding, long wait lists and frustrations from schools and parents. Children who need additional support have been missing out. And that is of great cost to them and to their families, and it is of great cost to our country. Because children with additional needs have enormous potential, and with this support, more of them will have the chance to realise it. It will also benefit their classmates, whose teachers will now be better supported to meet diverse learning needs. The extra budget funding will provide more teacher aid hours, more specialist support, more learning support coordinators, an expansion of early intervention services, and new learning support classrooms. Mr. Speaker, this investment will change lives. There is also new funding in the budget for schools' operational grants, early childhood education and tertiary education subsidies. And there is funding to increase the independent school subsidy to address price and volume pressures over time, delivering on the ACT and National Coalition commitment to review the funding formula. Extra maths help will be available for students who need it, with $100 million of new funding for early intervention and support. And there is a $140 million package of services to lift school attendance, and this delivers on another ACT and National Coalition commitment. Finally, more than $700 million has been set aside to deliver new schools, purchase sites, expand some schools and build new classrooms. The Honourable Erica Stanford, we did it. It's a great budget. Mr. Speaker, new funding in Budget 2025 continues the government's drive to restore law and order. The budget invests $480 million more to support police on the front line to crack down on crime and keep our communities safe. We will not be defunding the police. We are also keeping communities safe through stronger sentencing laws that mean less violent crime, fewer victims and more offenders in prison. The budget invests $472 million to ensure corrections can manage this increase in the prison population, including 580 new frontline staff. This reflects an ACT and National Coalition commitment to increase funding to ensure sufficient prison capacity. The government is also redeveloping Christchurch Men's Prison, with the project set to be designed, built, financed and maintained for 25 years under a public-private partnership. And I know the member for Selwyn is pleased. Court case backlogs will be reduced through $246 million of new funding, which will improve timeliness and access to justice. Customs is also receiving additional funding to strengthen our border, prevent drug smuggling and fight organised crime. Finally, I want to mention Māori and Pacifica Wardens and the Māori Women's Welfare League. They are the friendly faces when things get tough, and they are receiving funding in this budget thanks to New Zealand First. Mr. Speaker, for too long, New Zealand's Defence Force has been allowed to gradually deteriorate through loss of personnel and a failure to upgrade equipment. Budget 2025 marks a change in that course. A major uplift in defence spending will ensure New Zealand pulls its weight in an increasingly volatile world. And it does this by investing in the men and women of our military and giving them the modern tools they need to do their jobs. And this uplift cannot be funded in one budget alone. But we have made a meaningful start by funding priority projects, including new maritime helicopters. The budget also invests $660 million to improve core Defence Force capabilities across air, sea, land and cyberspace. In terms of foreign affairs, the budget addresses a very steep fiscal cliff in overseas development assistance, specifically for climate finance, that was unhelpfully left by the previous government. The budget addresses this, at least in part, through ongoing baseline funding of $100 million a year focused on the Pacific. Members will perhaps not be surprised to learn that the Minister of Foreign Affairs has made a very strong case for more funding, and this will be looked at in future. The budget also includes new funding of $84 million over 4 years to enhance New Zealand's relationships with Asian countries, address trade barriers and support the government's goal to double exports. Mr Speaker, Budget 2025 sets aside $230 million for a new social investment fund, of which $190 million is to purchase better outcomes for New Zealanders in need. Social investment is about the government investing earlier, guided by data and evidence, and with much more transparent measurement of the impact that interventions are having in people's lives. Mr Speaker, it is not enough to simply service misery. We have to actually make people's lives better.
No reira ko te minita take pūtea tērā i te iwi, Nicola Willis. E haere tunu ana tana whakapua ki tangake I te Tahua 2025. We are going to delve deeper into the budget soon, but let's now take a look not only at survey results, the next stage of survey results from the Te Ao Māori exclusive survey for Budget 25, and we'll also take you to Jess Tyson, who's outside Parliament. I think we're going to Parliament now with Jess, who is outside Parliament talking with Ripeka Lessels.
Tēnā koe, ko wai tō ingoa no hia koe?
Ko Ripeka Lessels tōku ingoa. I tēnei wā ko hau te manukura o Injiri Aotearoa, te union o nā kaiako I nā kura tuatahi o Aotearoa.
Kia ha koe I haere mai ai ki konei I te rānei?
Well, he take nui tēnei mana taurite kia tātou. Kia tātou katoa nā wāhine. He take I pupu ake e hia kēnei nā tau ki muri nei. Ni te whakakorehana o tēnei pire, o tēnei take I roto I a pāremata, ko whakakorehia te huarahi e tika ana, te whakatika I nā utu o nā wāhine, o nā kura tuarua, kura tuatahi, me nā kura kōhunahuna. Atu I te 55 nā kaiako, ko whakapara, ko whakakorehia e te kāwaratana. Koe rau I hara mai ai ki tēnei hui, tēnei rani.
What are your hopes to come out of this budget?
Kia moho mai ai te kāwaratana, ko whakararurarura koe ki nā wāhine o Aotearoa nei, wāhine Māori, wāhine Pākehā, wāhine katoa, I runa I tēnei ture a rātou. Ko whakararuraru. Nei, ko hui koe katoa mai rā ko nā wāhine. Kia kaua tātou e pōhehe, he wahine noho nei wēnei. Koe nei, te kaha o tēnei o Aotearoa, kai roto I nā wāhine nei. Tai koe rau e hara mai, koe rau e hehea kia rongo mai ai tēnei kāwanatana. Nā wōkoitau mahi he, whakakore I tēnei āhuatana nei, anei he whawhai kai te haere.
Kia ha o tino a wangawanga e pāna ki te mahi a te kāwanatanga?
Ko kare rātau e kōrero mai kia mātau. Kare rātau e paku whakapā mai kia mātau. E nei, anei tō mātau na hia, tēnā kōrero hia, me kōrero tahi rātau, te karekau. Haere rātau ki roto I te rūma, tere rā te whakautu, te urgency, ka mutu. Koe nā noho, so koe rā te raruraru, kia au. Kare rātau e hara mai te kōrero.
Kara, we tēnā koe I tōku Ka hoki au kia koutou.
Ko Jess Tyson tēra e kōrero ana ki te whakakaronogitanga mai o te o ngā uniana ara ki a Ripeka Lascelles. He kōrero ke roto i te whare, he kōrero no kei waho i te whare. Kia te tiro ake rā tātou ki e tahi atu o ngā pātai whiua ki te motu whānui. I roto tonu i te tatauranga i whakahaeretia Māti Purangi e Whakaata Māori. Let's take you now to the next section of answers to the exclusive survey put by Whakaata Māori on Budget 2025. Of the six parties represented in Parliament, ACTA is the one that is judged least favourably by Māori at 85%. National Fair's a little better. He pai ake, whitu te kaumārua o rau noi honi. Ko te Pāti Māori tērā tino manako hiana e te iwi Māori, he waru te kaumā whitu pai heneti te whiwhinga. Koe rā te kōrero nui, puta mō ngā pāti i roto i te whare pāremata. Kia tahuri ake tātou ki e tahi atu pāti, arā ko reipa ka hore i pērā rawa me ki te whiwhinga nui, pērā me te Pāti Māori i tērā o ngā tatau. And as mentioned, the Pāti Māori scores most favourably in terms of actions and policies, with 87% of those surveyed giving a positive verdict. Let's now look at making things better for Māori. He whakapakari ake i te iwi Māori rā ngā kaupapa here a ngā pāti. Ko te Pāti Māori kei mū anoa atu i te whitikau mā rima pai heneti. Ko te Pāti kākāriki, ara te rōpū kākāriki he whātikau mā toru kei mūri ko reipa. Ko ngā mea o te kāwanatanga, coalition government, he ko tahi ōrau nui honei te whiwhinga, ki te katoa, ko tahi rau ōrau kia New Zealand First National me te Party Act. Nā reira koe ena ko ngā kōrero i puta i te tatauranga a Whakaata Māori whakahaeretia i tērā wiki. Kia te tiro ake tātou ki ngā mahi te rōpū, ngā rōpū, ngā rōpū o te kāwanatanga, ngā pāti a te kāwanatanga i whiua ki te takiwā, kia te tiro ake rā tātou. Ki e tei o ngā kōrero e pāna ki te coalition. The coalition is not oppressing Māori. Of the six parties represented in Parliament, ACT, as we said, is one judged least favourably by Māori. Nō reira I tēnei wā ki hoki ake anō tātou, I think, ki te minita. Arā ki Nicola Willis e kōrero ana ki roto I te whare pāremata e haere tunu ana. Tana kupu whakamārama e pāna ki te Tahua 2025.
Tried a whole lot of smoke and mirrors to hide where their cuts are being made and to try and confuse New Zealanders with the idea that they'll be better off when, for a lot of Kiwi families, this budget is nothing but bad news. This is the budget that will be remembered as the budget that left women out. This is the budget that said to working Kiwi women, they are worth less. In fact, nearly $3 billion a year less. A budget that says that women are worth less than tax breaks for landlords. A budget that says women are worth less than tax breaks for tobacco companies. Shocking. A budget that says women are worth less than tax breaks for multinational corporations like Google and Facebook. Shame. A budget that says women are worth less than subsidies for the oil and gas industry. It's shocking. Shocking. Mr. Speaker, there's one thing this government have shown they're very adept at mining, and that is the pits of division. Mr. Speaker, it says everything about this government's twisted priorities, that they're saying to working Kiwi women that they are worth less than men doing work of comparable value. How dare they? Midwives, plunket nurses, those who help new mums and babies are worth less to this government. The care workers who look after our elderly are worth less to this government. The hospice nurses who support New Zealanders in their final days are worth less to this government. The teacher aides who support some of our most vulnerable children are worth less to this government. The librarians, the technicians, the support workers who keep our frontline services operating are worth less to this government. All of them being told loud and clear that they have to settle for less pay than men so that this government can balance its books after a series of bad choices they have made. That's right. Never in the history of this country have women been told work harder and get less. And yet that is what this government are saying.
That's what they said.
The country that was first to allow women the vote has nothing to be proud of today when it comes to advancing the cause of women. This is a budget that exposes how Nicola Willis and Christopher Luxon see hard-working and often low-paid Kiwi women, where the savings from devaluing women's work are being celebrated by people like David Seymour. And Winston Peters, who has a lot to say at the moment, the paragon of virtue, who's going to uphold the standards of Parliament, must have had his head in his hands when Nicola Willis described this as the no BS budget. What he didn't realise is that BS wasn't actually about a swear word. Because when she was talking about no BS, what she was being clear is the budget had no bold solutions. The budget had no bread and shelter for vulnerable New Zealanders. The budget had no back-paid settlements for women who have been fighting to have fair pay for far too long. And it had no better society. What it does have, though, Mr. Speaker, is big subsidies. Big subsidies for oil and gas, among others. This government has no vision beyond enriching those who are already doing well whilst dividing working New Zealanders in an attempt to distract them from the damage that they are doing to their lives and livelihoods. Mr. Speaker, this budget isn't only about cuts to women's pay, though, because for the second year in a row, that much promised cost of living relief the National Party banged on about during the election campaign is proving to be elusive. Remember the $250 a fortnight families with children were promised by Christopher Luxon during the election campaign. The government cannot find one single family, not one single family that's got the $250 a fortnight that they were promised repeatedly by the government during the election campaign. The party that puffs itself up on its own economic grandiose has exponentially failed on its flagship promise of cost of living relief for Kiwi families. But, Mr. Speaker, this gets worse, because Nicola Willis talked about the changes to working for families in her budget speech. What she didn't mention is that for 61,000 New Zealand families, their working for families is being cut.
That's right.
They're going to be $43 a fortnight on average worse off because of this government. I didn't hear anyone on the election campaign trail when speaking for National say that tens of thousands of families were going to be made financially worse off by this government, and yet that is exactly what today does. And for those who are supposedly better off, what do they get? Less than a block of butter a week extra. If they save it up over 2 weeks, they might be able to buy a block of butter. That's what they're getting, whilst 61,000 families are actually having the level of financial support they get cut by this government. Best Start payments are being cut for many families. It might not mean much to the members opposite, but for many of those families, it's a box of nappies or a tin of formula or potentially both a week that they are now missing out on. In the meantime...
Ko te kai arahi o te apiti hana tērā te iwi, Chris Hipkins me ana tau kupu. E pāne ki ngā whiwhinga moni a te hunga wahine. E pāna anō hoki ki ngā moni i iti no heonei ko ka whiua e te kāwanatanga ki te whakaora i te tangata o Aotearoa. Ke huri tātou ki te roturua nui, a kahumatoma moi I aia nei, the heart of tourism and the home of the Te Matatini 2025 champions love the kapahaka reference. And runners-up as well. Te kai kawe pūrongo o Aukaha News, ko ia te kai kawe pūrongo o te wā ki rotorua ko te kawa pāora tērā. Te kawa e kore kahore kai a koe ngā kōrero nui o te rohe iae nei nā, e pēhea nei te wairua ngā kōrero I te takiwā.
Tēnā koe, Jules, tēnā tātou katoa, korongo ki ngā kōrero, te kaiarahi o te pāti reipā Chris Hipkins. Te ahua nei e pērā hoki anō ngā whakaaro a e tehi o ngā kaimahi me ngā rato ngā hapori. Ki tēnei ki o mātou takiwā o Aukaha nei ki te Moana a toi ki roto o Waikato hoki. Me te aha ka whai wāhi ahau ki te kōrero ki e tehi o ngā kaimahi o ngā wahine Māori, o te rōpū wahine Māori toko i te ora me paura moio hoki e pāna ki ngā take ture me te tahua pūtea I puta mai I tēnei rā. Anei te pūrongo.
He rā nui tēnei mō tētahi o ngā kaiwhakahaere o Waikato Women's Refuge, kei te tāngia tōna kauai ki tōna hoa haere.
No confidence. I don't have any confidence in that, and why I say that is because what I've seen just recently with the new government, all the things that are not available to Māori anymore. And it's a real concern.
Kei te mura o te ahia, Ronnie, ki te whakaora I ngā wāhine, mea rātou tamariki, mai ngā tūkinotanga I roto I ngā whānau.
I noticed that domestic violence has increased over and over again for the more that are impoverished. It hasn't changed, it's got worse, and we've been here 40 years.
I think you just need to get off your and stop targeting Māori and disrespecting them and give the power back to them, give the resources back to them. Respect that we know what we're doing, we know how to look after our own.
Kua roa a paura moio e mahi ana I roto I ngā hapori mō te toko orangatanga o ngā whānau kua tūkinohia. Kaore a paura e paku whakapono ana he hua ka taka ki a ngai Māori I roto I tēnei tahua.
Tax the rich, look after the poor, break our cycles of poverty, do that and watch our country grow and roll. The are we defining what a woman is and what a man is? Our people never lived like that.
Times have changed, so I hear the police talking about how they've reduced family violence. Of course they have, they don't even turn up. But hey, more women and children have been killed since they've made that stand.
Ko Ariana Simpson tētehi o ngā kaiwhakahaere o Waikato Women's Refuge. Kei te tino hia kia kite I ngā hua o te tahua kia noho haumaru ko ngā whānau.
Well, if they were true partners in terms of, I don't see them in a partnership with Māori at all. And just looking at what's happening down in Parliament now, they're not partners.
The work I do over the years working with survivors of state care, they were targeted people. Most of them were thrown into institutions just by being Māori, being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Mō te taha ki ngā kaupapa ture o te tahua, ka whiwhi ki ngā wātene Māori he kotahi ira 5 miliona tāra ia tau mō te whātau.
No, it's not enough. So not only to Māori wardens, they also need to be able to work again alongside the frontline community groups that are in every community to be able to create that so it's more sustainable.
Ko te ahua nei kei te waia tatahi ngā kai hāpai I ngā hapori. Kaore he nui ngā manako ka puta hei hua I te tahua ki te hāpai I ngā tika o te ture kia noho haumaru ai a ngai Māori.
O te rōpū wahine Māori toko I te ora rātou ko paura moio e pāna ki e tehi o ngā huatanga ko pā ki a rātou I roto I te tau I roto I ngā tau ko pahure ake nei. Kaore kore ko kite a rātou I ngā moni e te kaumā whā miriona kua hoa atu e te kāwanatanga ki a rātou wai hoki ko ngā wātene Māori me ngā wātene Pasifika hoki. Arā no atu ngā kaupapa kei mua I a tātou e pāna ki tēnei tahua 2025.
Te kawa tēnā koe kawe nei te iho te wā I te rohe o te arawa whānui tonu te kaikawe pūronga no hoki o Aukaha te kawa tēnā koe mehiana ki hatia e te iwi ki haere tonu he kōrero as te kawa just said te kaumā whā miliona tāora ki te tāra ki te rōpū wahine Māori toko I te ora me te whiwhinga ki ngā wātene Māori me ngā wātene Pasifika kia huri tātou I aia nei ki te taiwhanga pāpāho o Te Ao Māori News ko te mai o ha pānapa tērā e whakamahi ana I ngā taringa o rongo mai taha nui o whakarongo mai taharangi o tūpai whakarongo wānanga, me te iho te kōrero ohoha o te wā i te tai rāwhiti, mai o ha tēnā koe.
Hia, ngā kai kei te kite kai a te kāwanatanga haumi. Me te aha, ko e tehi i whaihua, ko e tehi karekau. Ana, kei te tiro atu, kei te rongo ai ki tehi ekenga e puta ana ma tēnei mea te whare a ngā mea housing, kei te eke ki tēnā nama te kotahirau waru tekau rua irakati wha miriona tāra ki te tautoko i ngā whānau ki te kimi whare. Ana, kei te kite anō ki tētihi atu huhua kua puta mai, ka eke anō hoki mai i te tahua pūtea e 2025. Ki tēnā mea toru rau aku whakapāha, 82 miriona tāra. Kua tohaina ki ngā kaupapa kē atu, kua tango i ngā kaupapa Māori. Ana, ka mutu kei te tiro au ki tētihi o ngā huhua kua puta mai i te tahua pūtea, ka eke anō hoki ki tēnā mea kotahirau 25 miriona tāna kua tango i a kāinga ora. Nō reira, Julian, i tēneki wiki, ka rere atu anō ki te tiro ki te tairāwhiti, ki te uranga mai o te rā, ki tētihi wāhi e kaha rangona ana te tuākokatanga, ko te whakapuakitanga o te minita tuarua i ngā takewhare o Tamapōtaka. Ara, ko te 72 miriona tāra katohaina ki te rōpū a toitu tairāwhiti. Mo te whakatū whare, hei whakaruru hau i ngā iwi katoa o te kāinga i reira. No reira, ka te tiro atu mātou ki tēnā, ka tahuri mai nei.
E ahuru mō wai, he whare whakaruru hau i te hungareti whare i te tairāwhiti.
He mea hiki wairua tēnei. Nā reira, mōho tonu Tahua i patua o tātou whānau i roto i te tairāwhiti, i roto i te krakarangi tāwhiao, e te urupare Gabriel.
E kotahirau rima te kau ngā whare hou mō ngā whānau kei te tairāwhiti. Koe nā te kōrero a te kāwanatanga i raro i te hōtaka whare.
Ko te kaupapa he wāhi hauora tēnei, mō ngā whānau kotahirau rima te kau, i whakatūwheratia tērā kaupapa tēnei kaupapa e te pirimia nā reira no mātou te maringa nui.
E ai ki ngā kōrero, ahakoa e rima te kau mātoru paiheneti o te taupori i tēneki wā, he Māori. Tōna rua te kaumāwhitu irakati 5 paiheneti noiho he kaihoko whare. He hekinga tēnā i te 31 irakati 2 paiheneti.
Ko te āwhina i ngā whānau e tino pōhara ana, e patu ana i tēnei wā. Ahakoa e rā mahi. Ko te kaupapa nui, ko te tiaki, ko te maranaki, i ngā whānau e noho i roto i te pōharatanga.
E whiti te kaumārima miriona tāra ka tohaina e te kāwanatanga ki te whakawhanake i ēneki whare hou mō ngā mema o te iwi e noho taumaha ana.
Ētahi o tātou whānau, kei te noho i roto i ngā whare mo te kau, ara te cow shed. Ētahi o tātou whānau, kei te noho i roto i ngā whare rua te kau, ngā tāngata i roto i te whare kotahi, ara te overcrowding. Nā reira, me ngākau nui tātou, ki o tātou whānau e noho ana i roto i te pōharatanga.
Ko te whainga nui i tēneki wā, kia horapa e tēneki rautaki ki te rohe katoa o te tairāwhiti.
Ana, no reira, koena te mea nui, kua mahia kētia, kei reira, kei te rohe o te tairāwhiti i tēnei wā e hoa mā. Ana, kei te tiro atu anō koe ki koutou tātou katoa, ki tēnā ekenga o te nama tainoa ki tēnā tau i te tahua pūtea 2002 te kaumawha tainoa ki tēnei tau. Engari, ko te mea nui, kei a koutou katoa ngai Māori, ngā whare titiro mo tēnei tau, koena te pātai tino nui rawa atu. No reira, kei te tahuri atu te rakau, ki a koe i tēnei wā e Julian.
Tēnā koe mai o hae panapana mai nei ngā kōrero nui te tairāwhiti, i e tai atu ngā tirohanga whānui ki te tahua o te tau. Kia huri ake te aro i aia nei e te iwi ki te tai hauā uruku nei tangara o ngā tini waka. Ko te kai kōrero i reira, ko te kai tātaki wahine o te tau i te matatini, representing te reo o te uru Māori media, kia omoko whiti atu rā tātou, kia aroha Broughton Pue, kei ngā motu i aia nei, aroha hea nei ngā kōrero e whiu wāna ki te takiwā e pāne ki te tahua o te tau.
Kei taku tākuta tēnā koe o tira e te motu tēnā koutou katoa. Ara ia te kete kua wauia e koutou katoa kei ōku oa. Nō reira, ko konei tātou e āta. Ruku ia Tahua kano tonu e kite ai tātou i e te i o ngā ua taketake. I puta tonu i tēnei rā tonu. Ka tumata ki ngā kōrero a te minita take rawa ki a matua Shane Jones tonu. E ai ki a ia ko he take nui tēnei mea te au pūngao i konei i Aotearoa nei. Ke te kite mai koutou ke te ata eke mai ko te ua. He ko patapata i tēnei wā, he tau nui e pari mai ko ngā tai pōuri pōkere tonu ki runga i ngā tai o Taranaki nei. No tērā wiki, tonu ka tere waka o i te pire e wai wakaro, Environmental Protection Agency, te kuu atu a ngā kamupene maina ki te maina ia ngā kura taketake o te ware tangaroa i te tai au auru tonu. Nō reira, ko tētei o ngā kaupapa ko tētei o ngā rōpū apori ko Protect Our Moana, tērā e tiaki ana i te tai au o Tangaroa. I tuku atu i tētei pire waka i ngā mai maina ki te kauni era o ngā motu. Ko te kimi tautoko tā rātou wai, kia kaupare i ngā kamupene maina me a rātou mai, kei mua tonu, anei tērā o ngā pūrongo.
Kua kuu atu tēnei ope waka i ngā mai maina i te tākere o te Moana o Taranaki, ki te tāpai pēti ana atu, ki te kauni era o ngā motu.
Today was an important day to activate North Taranaki communities and New Plymouth District Council around the issue of seabed mining and really get them to engage in this very critical issue and to bring them into putting a submission forth and having that unanimous decision to oppose seabed mining.
We actually packed out the council chambers today. We had no more seats left. There was only room for standing, so that's an epic show of support for this.
E uria Fiona Young na kōtirani, engari kua tipu mai ia ki roto i a Taranaki, nāna i timata i a Project Our Moana, me ana hoa.
We are in a time when our moana needs to be protected. It needs to be taken care of and for regeneration, not a new experimental extractive industry in our moana. It is a place of sustenance, spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally. It is a breath of life. More than 50%, 70% of the oxygen we breathe comes from the moana. If we set a precedent for seabed mining off our coast, where will that end? It will open up the doors for many more, including internationally. So certainly something important to stand up against.
We want action. We voted you in. We can vote you out.
There's a number, multitudes of whānau and community members that oppose the seabed mining decision that is being made at the moment by government and also here locally in Taranaki. We've heard that Wanganui Council have opposed it and that South District Council have opposed it, and now, not that we'll be deciding on that today.
Ko te waka McLeod tētei o ngā kai kauni era Wāri Māori o ngā motu, e pōuri te kite i tēnei unga e kawe i tēnei nei pēti ana ei rautaki tiaki i te oranga o te takutai Moana.
Obviously it means something to our people, again not just our Māori people but all those that live in Taranaki and Wanganui, probably Aotearoa, to have a rōpū come in and I'm imagining that we're going to hear not just words, we're going to hear grief, we're going to hear mamae, we're going to hear the longing again for Māori, the longing to have control over our waterways, have control over our moana, again to make sure that people aren't coming in and taking away everything within our moana.
That also, all the energy in the room today, packing it out, having only standing room available as well, alongside the petition to show that we're really in this here in Taranaki. That there's a strong mandate to take action,
that there's good reason and support to oppose seabed mining.
What happens is they say they bring money to Aroe, but actually they don't do that. They bring money to Aroe, but they actually take it all offshore, and we don't benefit as we could if we just actually had our ika, you know, and all our seafood that we have. So it's sad to know that people are coming in today to petition, but that's what we do, that's how it works.
Ko te manako nui o tēnei rōpū apori kia tautoko te kauni era o ngā motu i a rātau, kia kaua ea ei ngā kamupene maina, te mai ki ngā tākere o ngā moana o te Te Ao Māori. Aroha Gordon Pue, te reo o te uru. Ka tī koira te pūrongo e ata kōrero ana mō tēnei kaupapa nui o roto i a tātou o te Te Ao Māori. E tā te mai runga i tēnei kōrero ai mo te ua ka ōrapa te rongo mō enei kupu tonu me tēnei kaupapa nui i roto tonu i a mātou o te Te Ao Māori. Ka kuta mai anō ko tamanui te rā. Nō reira, ka tī ka oki ake ki te waka rāpopoto i ngā kōrero o te minita take rawa amatua Shane Jones. Ka wangaia ko tētei ruarau miriona tāra ki ngā mai au pūngau ka wai mai. Ko e te i o ngā ua o tērā ka wai mai te unga tangata ka waka oki pūtea ki te kōanga ka rewa anō ko tēnei mea te pūngau. Ka oki ake ki ngā kōrero a tou kākai rāua ko te uiti o rongo mai. Anai tā rāua, e kore e piri te uku ki te rino, ka witingia e te rā, ka ngā oro e. Ka o kia tura kia koe kei taku matua e te tākuta Julian.
Aroha Bolton Pue, tēnā koe, tū mai nā koe i te taha Moana tunu. Arā i te tai hauauru kia tau te tō mairangi a tā whai e patapata i hoana ki runga i a koe tēni wā ki runga ki a kūtau katoa i no te ngā rai ki ana. Aroha Bolton Pue, me tana pūrongo i te tai hauauru. Kia huri tātau i aia nei kia tū taku manawa i te horanga o te whenua me te horanga o te kōrero. E pāna ki te Tahua 2 te kau Māori mua. Kei reira, te kai kawe pūrongo o te reo te uru ki te papai oea ki te manua tū ara ko Regan Paranihi tāku e kōrero ake ana e te kai kawe pūrongo ki te rohe o te manua tū whānui tonu kei te papai oea i tēnei wā. Regan, tēnā koe.
Kei te kākākura o reo kia tika, o reo kia Māori, o tira, o te reo pāpāho, tēnā koe. E tikara, tōna ko tahi piri ona tāra kua whai wāhi e ngā hohi piro o te motu i tēnei rā. Engari, ko tāku e mātai nei ko te taha ki te hauora Māori. Mehe nā rānei kua whai hua te taha hauora Māori ki tēnei o ngā tahua pūtea 2025. I puta atu au ki te mātai e tehi o ngā tōmina nui, o ngā kairaupi i te hauora ki konei ki te papai o ia nōna tata nei. Kia ki te rā he aha rawa ngā tōmina o tēnei pukanga o te whānau ora.
Ko te whakarite i te taraka, kia tō haina tēnei kete o te ora.
And with the increase in living costs experienced by everybody across our communities, Te Whare Pūkai has been a bit of a beacon. A lot of whānau had lost jobs, we were unsure of what was going on and were really struggling to make ends meet.
Ko tā Vanessa Sydney Richmond, te kai whakahaere o te tari o te ora nei, kua tai tuaratia e Te Whare Pūkai mo te tini o Māui i te wā o te uruta i ngā wā mōrearea anō hoki.
We've been able to purchase bulk kai and then distribute out through those 15 iwi Māori providers, and they've been able to then go to the doorsteps of whānau and deliver on the kai there, for whānau out there.
There are many things that have kind of disappeared off the landscape. You would hope to see that housing was also at the top of the agenda.
E mahi ngā tahi ana te tihi o ruahine tētahi ratonga hauora a hapori nei, me ngā mana whenua o te papai o ia, ki te tautoko i a rātau, ki te hanga whare kia ora ngā whānau o te rohe.
It provides opportunity for security of housing, creating wealth for not only themselves living in that now, but future generations.
A lot of them are third generation renters, and the possibility of moving into a new whare that they could actually one day own had always been a dream, and so this pathway was for them to climb into home ownership.
He tauira kia para I te ara whairawa, e mana ko nui nei a Materoa Raiwa ko Rowley, ka kitea he pūtea tautoko mō ngā take hangawhare.
No, there are a lot of iwi Māori providers around the country that are trying to do similar things. We have had some great success, as have others. But if we're not doing it, we know that the government isn't going to do it either.
Puare ana te tatau o tēnei whare monaia nei, he oi, kaore he pūtea kia taunaki I tēnei kaupapa moa popo.
Yeah, it is in a really precarious position, which means our whānau don't necessarily have that support out in the community anymore.
There's so much evidence to show that having secure housing benefits whānau in so many ways.
E rua te kaumawha katoa ngā whare kua hangaia e tēnei tira I roto I ngā tau erima kua hori, ka mutu, e whanga ana rātau kia hanga I e te hi anō whare. Regan Paranihi, te reo o te uru.
Ai, no te tīmatanga o tēnei hōtaka e taima. I ki te koutou ko te mea, kei te tihi o whakaaro o te iwi Māori, ko te oranga torutanga, ko te wharetapa whātera, e kai ngā kau nui ana te iwi Māori I tēnei wā. He oi anō, te kite I taua manawa nui ki te iwi Māori maroto I tēnei tahua, I raro I te taumarutanga o te hauora. No reira, kare e tino mohi o haha kei tua mo te wāhi ki te hauora Māori, mo te wāhi ki a whānau ora. Heoi anō e tōmina nui ana e nei, tēnei peka o whānau ora, te tihi o ruahine, ngā kai raupi I te ora o te papai o ia o manawatu o horowhenua anō hoki, ka whai hua rātau ako ake nei ki te wāhi, ki te tahua e Julian.
Regan, tēnā koe, manawa nui ana koe ki ngā kōrero kei te rohe o te manawa tū, e tūwana taku manawa ki te mihi atu ki a koe, Regan Paranihi, te kaikawe pūrongo o te reo te uru ki te manawa tū tēnā koe. O te pūrongo tērā a Regan e pāna ki ngā mahi whānau ora hauora Māori anō hoki ki roto I te rohe o te manawa tū, engari ko te tukumata o ka hungunua anō hoki tēnā kua pēwapea I te aha arai ngā horanga kōrero a te kāwanatanga I tēnei rā, kia moko whiti atu rā tātou I aia nei kia Michael Cugley, he tukumata no ka hungunu, me tai o ngā kōrero o tōna iwi, o te rohe whānui tonu e pāna ki tēnei whakapuakitanga mai I te kāwanatanga I aia nei nā, te tukumata o ka hungunu, Michael, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, taku rangatira e Julian. O tira tātou katoa e hono mai nei ki tēnei pāhotanga motuhake a Te Ao Māori News. Ana, me aha he kōrero I tū atu, ia tama te ariki nui, ia tā ki timu waka. Me ki pēnei, ko te kōpaki hauora te tino o ngā wāhi, ka whakapaua ngā moni a te kāwanatanga. I te rātau ko atu I te 8 piriona tāra te nui o te rā pūtea. Heoi anō I tēnei tau, e 734 miriona tāra ka tukua ki ngā pārurenga o te tūkinotanga, ki ngā whare tiaki tamariki a te kāwanatanga, 5.5 piriona tāra mō ngā hōhi pera me ngā ratonga mātanga. E whārau 47 miriona tāra ki te whakawhānui I ngā ratonga o te pō. Julian, nōna tata nei au I kōrero atu ki te heamana o ngā tika hungunu kia Baden Barber, ki te kohi I ona whakaaro mo te tahua pūtea I tēnei tau.
Pai te rongo, he pūtea hou, ka tuku atu ki ngā hohipera kua kaumātua tia. Pērā I tō tātou hohipera I konei, he pai te rārongo. Hoi no, ko tāku hia tia nei, kia kite ai wetahi tahua, ka hāngai pū kia tātou, te iwi Māori, ka rea te kārongo I te pērā, hanga era moni nui kei hea te wāhi kia Tahua. He nui ngā māwiwitanga kei te pātunu mai kia mātou. Hea te rongoa, ai, kei te tāria mātou, ki te tai kāwanatanga e nāka nui ana ki era kaupapa, ingari, auare ake. Tēnei tau, enga tau katoa kua hipa. Nō re, ko tai ki te wāpea kia atu whakaro tātou, me pēhea tātou nei tū, hei tautoki a tātou anō. Me auahanga whakaaro ki a tātou anō, me pēhea tātou nei whakapiri I a tātou anō, kia tutuki pai ai e rā wawata.
Ana nā ngā kōrero o taku rangatira I te kāinga a Baden Barber, me tana tūmanako, me tana āki nui kia tātou katoa te iwi Māori, kia pupuri ki tēnei mea, te mana motuhake, kia pupuri ki tēnei mea, te tino rangatiratanga, kia hoki anō ki a koe, e Julian.
Tēnā koe mai koe i whakaungunga rā koe ki te tūmata kuru, ki te taraonga, ki te kahi katoa o ngā kōrero i te kāinga, arā i te tiamana o te iwi. Nō reira mai koe e mihi atu ana ki a koe. Kua rongo koutou e ngai iwi, ko ngā take nui kōrero tia te iwi Māori, a pāna ki te ora o te tangata, te hauora o te tangata, me te ora oha, ko iena ko ngā kōrero e puta ana i ngā rohenga o te motu iaia neina. Te rāpea, ko i hoki te iho o ngā kōrero, e mauna i te tehi atu o ngā kaikawe pūrongo e haere ake ni. Arā ko te kaikawe pūrongo o Tahu News, ka whakawhiti atu tātou i te mono o raukawa, ke tau ake rā tātou ki a Shakaila Alapaki Andrews o Tahu News. Kei o tautahi i aia nei, kei te kura o haiata. Shakaila, he ahia rā ngā kōrero kei te kete, e whawhaohia ane koe i tēnei wā, o tira e ngā iwi kei ko i a koe nā.
Tēnā koe Julian, o tira tēnā tātou katoa. Aira e Jules, ko ita rawa ko tēnei tahua, e ai ki ngā kōrero o te wā, ko tōna ko tahirau mā whā miriona tāra, ka haere ki te tautoko, ki te taha ako o ngā tauira, ka mutu ko tōna 50 miriona tāra, ka haere ki te whakatū he akumanga hou, kei ngā kura Māori. I tēnei wiki, i kōrero tahi ahau ki ēnei tūmuaki, no te kura kaupapa Māori o te kura whakapūmau i te reo tūturu ki Waitaha, me te pā kai hautu, anei a rawa whakaro e pāna ki te tahua. E mōhio pū ana a Merita Waitoa Paki ki ana hia mā tōna kura i tēnei rā tahua.
Kia whakapiki te pūtea mō ngā kaiako, i roto i ngā mahi whakangungu. Ai, me te āhuatanga te pūtea whakahaere i ngā kura, te mahi hangahanga o ngā kura, ko te whakatika i te rā.
Ko Waitoa Paki te tumuaki, o te kura kaupapa Māori o te kura whakapūmau i te reo tūturu ki Waitaha. Nā, i roto mai ngā tau e ono kua hipa, ko piki ake ngā nama a ngā tauira i uru atu ki ngā kura Māori, mā te 20 mā ono ōrau. E ai kia Waitoa Paki, me whai pūtea rātau.
Ko ina tērā pūtea, mo te kura kotahi kura aunua nei, ko ina te rahinga katuku ki ngā kura ono te kaumāwhitu o te runanga nui o ngā kura kaupapa Māori aho matua. Nā reira, ko te whakapiki ngā utu ki i rā momo wāhi. Whakangungu kai ako, koina, me te hauora hoki. Me mahi tahi te ao mātauranga me te ao hauora. Mā reira ka ora i rā taha e rua. He mea nui te hauora, he mea nui hoki te mātauranga. Nā reira, hari te tino ki te rā i roto i ngā tāhua pūtea kua he pāke nei, hoi anō.
Heoi, no te rangi nei, i putanga nama te kāwanatanga e pāna ki te mātauranga. E ono rau whātekau mā ono miriona tāra ki ngā tamariki e raru ana i ngā akomanga. He piki ngā pūtea ki ngā kura mō ngā mahi whakahaere i ngā kura. He kotahirau miriona tāra kia āwhina i ngā tauira mo te pangarau. Heoi, he kotahirau whātekau miriona tāra kia piki ake ngā nama a ngā tauira kia uru atu ki te kura.
Ko te tuku i te mana motuhake kia mātou. Mā tātou tonu, ngā kaupapa Māori, te ara Māori, ana kei te kōrero ai mo ngā kura kaupapa Māori aho matua, ngā kura āiwi. Kei te kōrero ai mo enei kura. Kaua ko ngā kura aunua, me ka noho rata i raro i te whakahaere o kura aunua. He mea whakahaere e te Māori mo te Māori.
He pātata atu ki te kura whakapūmau, arā ka tū ko te kura o te pā arā kai hautu. E ai ki te tūmuaki a te reina tāhau, me whai wāhi rātou i roto i ngā whakatau e pāna ki ngā tahua a te kāwanatanga.
He waua no te kimi i te painga ki te kore mātou ki te tepu. Ki te kore te minute e kōrero mai kia mātou e hāpai ana tēnei nā o ngā kaupapa.
Nā, e mōhio ana he uaua te kite i te rongoa ki ngā raru nui puta noa i ngā kura.
I karanga mai a Minister Seymour ki a mātou ngā tūmaki o Waitaha nei. Ko ia tērā e kōrero ana ki ngā tūmaki ruatikau mai tāna ake rohe, ara ko Epson tērā. He rere ke rawa. He rere ke rawa ngā āhuatanga o ia rohe.
Tai hoa ke ka kite mena ka whai hua ngā kura nei i tēnei tahua. Shakaila Andrews Alapaki, Tahu News.
Ahakoa kua piki haere te pūtea mō ngā tamariki haua me ngā tamariki karo i te kura, ka re kore, marama ana te kite, he tau anō, he tau uaua anō, mā ēnei tūmuaki, kana hoki konei ki te wai pounamu. Ka hoki atu te toki pounamu ki a koutou, kei tāmaki makaurau.
Tēnā koe, Shakaila, tuku mai nei te toki pounamu ki a mātou i aia nei nā me te ahuaranga o te pounamu ngā kōrero i o te a koe mihi ana. Shakaila Alapaki Andrews there from Tahu News. And as she said, education spending, yes, 664 million for learning needs, 100 million for maths, 140 million for school absences. However, ko te kōrero, ko ngā kura au noa e rā motu hake ake ko te iwi Māori. He hai ane ngā kōrero kei te tai tokerau kei te whare ōpuhi. I ai ki ngā kōrero e tū tangatanga ana te whare i ai neina i ngā kōrero i puta i te tahua ki a te huri ake tātou. Ki te kai kawai kōrero Te Ao Māori News i piri atu ki tērā taha o tōna whakapapa. Rā ki te rohe o te tai tokerau. Kua miria te kōrero nui o te tahua. E tō tātou kai kōrero e rīria. Dalton Reedy kei a tātou kei tai whangapāpāho Te Ao Māori News. I aia nei rīria, he hae ni ngā kōrero e karawhiu hana i tēnei wā.
Titiro ki ngā wai o tokerau e hora nei ki tua, mehe pipi wharau roa, takoto te pai, takoto te pai. Julian, kua karawhiua te minita whanaketanga Māori, tō hua pūmau no te aute a tama pōtaka. Me te aha, i nā te nui o ngā moni kua whakakorea i te pūkoro o te puni kōkiri. Nā ko ngā kaupapa pēnei me te tahua whai kāinga, whai oranga, kua korera wātu, ka mutu ko te tahua whakawhanake Māori, kua tapahia i te 5 miriona tāra i ia tau. Ko tahi ira 5 miriona tāra ka tohua ki ngā wātene Māori, e te kaumātoru ira 2 miriona tāra ka tohua ki te rōpū wāhine Māori toko i te ora, o tira e 382 miriona tāra kua tangohia i te puni kōkiri mō ngā take whare kato haina ki wāhi ki atu. Nā reira, kāre he tinohua kua puta ki te Māori i tēnei tau. Heoi anō, kāre kore he kaupapa nui ka wānanga hia ka tohia ki rō pāre mata i ngā marama haere ake nei. Kei taku matua e Jules.
Tēnā koe rīria me te rātau tapatanga āu e karangahia nei he hoa pūmau ki au tō minita pāpāho Māori me tō minita whakaata Māori an hoki a tama pōtaka e mi atu ana ki a koe rīria tēnā koe i e nā kōrero i e rā whakatewha te whakahanga kia hatia e te iwi. Kua rongo koutou i te iho i te puha o te kupu o te kōrero. We've seen and heard the budget statement from the Minister of Finance, Nicola Willis. We've also seen the response from the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins. Let's now return to our panel of experts. As introduced earlier, we have with us Shamabil Yakub and Kapua Smith. Okay, lots to digest, or maybe not, Shamabil, but let's get into it. Your first reactions, thoughts on what you've heard from the budget?
Well, big changes in KiwiSaver, which of course from Simplicity's perspective it's important. Look, it's good to see the contributions rates increase gradually over time, but we also know that unless we de-link the employee contribution from the employer contribution, it's going to be unfair on people who are on low incomes. So we really need to assess that. The reduction in the subsidy for KiwiSaver is a real concern because essentially what we're saying is it's fine to means test for New Zealanders who want to save for themselves, but we will not save the same amount of money when it comes to things like superannuation. So to give you some context, the subsidy for KiwiSaver costs $1 billion a year. The New Zealand super payments are $25 billion a year.
So, did that surprise you, by the way, that announcement on KiwiSaver? The government needed to cut its cloth. Are you surprised that they cut its cloth on KiwiSaver contributions?
Look, they had already announced that they were going to cut this contribution and this support, this incentive. And to me, it's a little bit disappointing because this incentive, without a longer-term plan in terms of how we improve our pension system, is problematic. So we keep seeing this tinkering around the edges in terms of how to look after our ageing population, but we do it at a piecemeal way. And when we're attacking people's actual money, this is not the government's money, right? KiwiSaver is our own money, and having those incentives taken away means that those tax cuts that we got last year, they've just been reduced for a whole bunch of people. So it's kind of take with one hand and give with one hand and take with the other. That's a little bit of a problem. So the KiwiSaver thing, to my mind, was a little bit of a disappointment from that side, but also the overall direction, there was a positive. So like anything, shades of grey.
Yeah. Are you surprised also at you talked about the overall direction there? I mean, this is a government, as we said earlier, it's an OBS budget. It also feels like a bit of a bits and pieces budget, if I'm honest.
Absolutely. So when I was looking at the numbers, what I found was of all the votes, 2/3 of them are not going to keep up with inflation and population growth. So we're not funding for the growth in the number of people in New Zealand or the increase in the cost of living in New Zealand. So as a result, we're going to see this sinking lid across many things. So in budgets, you'll find that there's a lot of engagement around those new announcements and all of that kind of stuff, and that's important. But what's also important is this reduction in state capacity and existing services, as we talked about before. That worries me. But also you'll see in the specific details the amount of money that's available for essentially things like Pacific Affairs, for Maori development, for ethnic communities, for arts, for sports, anything that's actually kind of social, that stuff has really been cut back.
Kapua Smith, let's talk about, particularly in Māori affairs. I mean, there are some things here. I mean, Māori Women's Welfare League, close to 14 million. Of course, the pre-announced budget for the Māori Wardens, Pacifica Wardens, yep, over $1 million. A little bit of money there for Kohanga Reo. But aside from that, a less than subtle shift from Māori allocated spending to a wider universal, what was the phrase again? I had it down here, now I've just lost it. But anyway, a wider approach, a flexible fund, right?
Yeah, I'm going to call it mainstreaming. Okay. Mainstreaming of Māori money. You have a couple of Māori initiatives sprinkled throughout the budget, but they feel very limited. My expectation is that Māori should get a proportion of all the initiatives for which there is new money, but it is pretty concerning, I think, the direction away from money tagged specifically to Māori initiatives, given the disparity and the inequities that exist. I mean, the need is there. The data shows that there is a need for Māori development initiatives specifically tagged to Māori and Pacific and disability and rural communities that are just not reflected in this budget.
That's a sentiment that was expressed by the principal, actually, the tumuaki of Te Kura Whakapūmau i Te Reo Waitaha, and also by the principal at Aukaha too, particularly in education, right? So we've seen that move. It's also very pronounced in housing. And again, this is something that potentially was portended last year with the removal of the $20 million from the rangatahi budget allocation last year. So has the government simply just continued on the track that it began last year? Or do you see this actually as greater traction, as a much more kind of deliberate, purposeful approach that it will not change direction on anytime soon?
I actually think there are moves in this budget which reflect a slight shifting back. Okay. For example, a tagged allocation, even though it's just reprioritised same money for a Māori education package, for example. There is money tagged specifically to kura and the network and developing classrooms in the future. So there are small little things which signal that I think, you know, there are parts of the government where focus on Māori initiatives still survives, but overall and largely we're seeing that mainstreaming take effect. Okay, and the survey that Whakaata Māori did just last week, the top priorities that they talked about, the main concerns, standard of living, housing and health, and also te ora o te Māori, Māori wellbeing. Anything in this budget that deals with those concerns that were raised by those participants and respondents in the survey? And yes, in that there was additional funding for health infrastructure, etc. I have a question over where workforce development sits, because we actually need to feed the workforce if we want better outcomes for our whānau. But the second thing is, what is Māori wellbeing versus general wellbeing? Where is the investment into te reo, into our cultural revitalisation, into all of the things that lift our wairua as Māori, which is part of Māori wellbeing? That is not reflected at all in this budget.
And also that investment, that $1 billion earmarked investment, you know, that's a little bit of kind of looking at a specific policy. But if you look at the overall scope of investment, that's going to be averaging $22 billion in the next 3 years. But the last 3 years up to 2023, it was $29 billion. So we actually be investing less. So it's, again, to me, there's a little bit of a distraction there in terms of, the overall quantum of investment by government is going to fall, but there is earmarked increased allocation for certain things. And so I think when you look at these kinds of budgets, what happens is you see these kind of specific announcements that look really good at face value, but then there is all these kind of other things that are not happening. And especially with the workforce thing, I think I absolutely agree with you. There is a real issue there because, you know, in the budgets it says they're going to be saving $11 billion from the pay equity issue. Well, who are these people? It is the people in health and education and aged care. So on the one hand, they're saying that we're doing more on health and education and we want better outcomes. But on the other side, they're saying we're saving money by not paying the people who do the work.
Do you think this is strategic in that we know this is the second year of the first term of this particular
Absolutely.
government and we're getting to an election year next year? The Minister mentioned $5.3 billion in savings, interest rates 30 basis points lower. So are we preparing for an election, a big election spend, an election year in 2026?
Well, it's very much a midterm budget, because in the midterm budget you want to get all the difficult stuff done so that you've got the ability to kind of create vote incentives in the election year. So it's not surprising, but I guess the attack and the reduction on large swathes of public services is actually really big. So because so much of it is not keeping up with population growth and inflation, like 2/3 of votes across government, we are going to see quite a lot of pain. And this is a really big gamble on by this government, because you can starve your donkey and beat it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go faster.
Yeah. Is this out of step with, I mean, we've seen elections happen this year. Look at the Australian election, look at the Canadian election, look at what's happening in the global economy at the moment and the influence of Donald Trump and those kinds of things. Has this government overplayed its hand in terms of safety to build up for next year, or is it simply trying to keep things the way that it has delivered this year in case something else happens in America where it sneezes and New Zealand gets a massive fever and a cold?
Sure. Look, I think they're actually very consistent with what they campaigned on. They said they would do these kinds of things, and they have done it. So it's not surprising that they're doing what they're doing. It's the speed of it is, I think, unusual compared to previous cycles in New Zealand. But if you look at what's going on internationally, what we're seeing is people are getting quite concerned about this rapid pullback of public services, of erosion of trust in our public institutions. And therein lies a little bit of that in this budget and the activities of government is when you are being really fast, when you are doing things quite quickly and not giving the opportunity for public to engage with it, you can turn people off. So we know that half of New Zealanders don't trust politicians in Wellington. And when they see these kinds of things, it can be one of those issues. And as you know, that means that election becomes an issue. And we know that majority of New Zealanders still don't think New Zealand is heading in the right direction, despite the change of government that we've had recently. So there is a bit of a gamble that's coming up, and they really have to prove that these policies they're pursuing are working.
Okay. I just want to ask you about pay equity. This is something that the opposition leader, Christopher Hipkins, talked about actually a lot in his budget speech. $12 billion savings over 4 years. Is this going to become a major election issue, do you think, and in particular for wahine Māori as well, given a number of the services that will be affected by this inequitable pay solution the government has made here?
I think that the priorities of this government were well signalled ahead of this budget. And I think there are a number of minority groups in Aotearoa which will take issue with a certain direction that we have been seeing. I also wanted to say, just in terms of budget analysis, it's really important to also think about what's not named in here. So it's not a savings area and it's not a new initiative. Does it still survive within our current system? And where we still have those pockets of goodness which are supporting kaupapa Māori, wahine, whatever equity issue we want to think about, it's really important to reflect on that as well. Because I think the period that we're in at the moment is not only not one where we can't expect goodies, it's one where we just have to hold the line. And so whatever survives is a win in the context of the current environment.
Right, let's take a look at the budget allocations in certain vote areas now. Kia te tiro ake tātou, ki ngā tuaritanga mai a tēnei kā wanatanga. Wa tairi ake ngā kōrero ki runga i te whakaata I aia nei, 1.1 billion in ngā take ture, 2.5 billion he rua ira 5 piriona tāra I te tā ki te mātauranga, he 2 piriona tāra I te haora. You heard those announcements as well in terms of infrastructure, critical infrastructure. I think in the minister's speech at Nelson Hospital as well as other hospital infrastructure projects. Ngā take whare tata ki te 2 piriona tāra, ki ngā take whakawhanake Māori he te kaumātoru ira 2 miliona tāra. That is made up, of course, with the Māori Women's Welfare League, the Kohanga Reo budget, as well as the budget allocation to Māori wardens and Pacifica wardens as well. Let's get some comment on those. I mean, I know we talked a little bit about them already, Shamabeel. And I'm going to come to Kapua about the pressure now on the Minister for Māori Development, actually. But first of all, a big spend that actually the Minister made specific reference to with Erica Stanford in terms of the spend in education, $646 million in learning needs, $100 million in maths, $140 million in absences from schools. Is this just kind of surfing around the extremities here, or is this actually going to make fundamental change?
I think there's two things. One is that those are areas that we do need to do more on. But if you're funding that from reducing other things within the education vote, then you're kind of taking from one side and putting it another. So shuffling of the deck chairs, and that's the bit that we keep seeing in this budget is it's not so much the envelope of funding and the resources has increased, it's just they're still trying to hold it in. And they're saying, but look at these new things that we'll do within that. So the risk is, as we try to do more things with less money, that something has to give. And so if you look at the education vote, for example, it doesn't keep up with population growth and inflation. So it's just like many other things, education is one of those things. So again, it's that context of specific policies versus actually, are teachers going to get paid more? Are we going to have enough money to run schools effectively? Those things are still not resolved.
And yet the Minister started her budget speech by saying this is a budget that sets New Zealand up for growth, that enables New Zealand to be able to spend more on things like education, health, cost of living and those kinds of things. Is that simply not what has happened in this budget, in your analysis?
Well, factually, you can see that they're actually spending less in 2/3 of the votes across government. It's not keeping up with population growth, it's not keeping up with inflation. So either it's a genius move that says by spending less we're going to get better outcomes, or it's a unicorn. The alternative is that we're going to spend less and we're going to get less, or we're going to get worse quality. And I think that is the big test this government has to deliver over the course of the next 12 months, because the election's not that far away. What I see in the budget is there is less resources, there is less capacity, and they still want better outcomes. I just don't think it adds up.
Okay. Kapua, I said that I was going to come to you on the Minister for Māori Development. Really charitably referred to him as an associate of mine, which I've taken in certain ways. But nevertheless, let's proceed. 13.1 or ish million in the Māori Development vote, Māori Development spend is not a lot. How much pressure now comes from the Māori community, do you think, upon the shoulders of the Minister?
And I don't want to hold Te Ao College to account. However, I do think there has always been quite a lot of pressure on Tama's shoulders, the Minister of Māori Affairs' shoulders. He has carried the face of Māoridom in this government. And I just want to, yes, we can be harsh. Yes, the operating allowance for Te Puni Kōkiri has gone down, for Māori development has gone down, like every department has. But it still survives. And I think that's what we need to focus on as well. Whānau water is not mentioned in here. It doesn't get an increase, but hey, it's still there. I mean, this is the period of time that we are in now. We are in a moment where we are trying to hold the line. So, yes, there is a significant amount of pressure. Yes, there are significant expectations that things need to get better, and hopefully they do for Māori very soon. But at the same time, and being a realist about all the signalling that we've received over the last few years, it is still a win that some of these Māori initiatives survive. In saying that, pressure does need to go on to those accountable, specifically to our ministers who are responsible for Māori development initiatives.
Yep. Do you mind if I ask you about Te Waiponamu as well, because we have a new minister for the South Island. He's a ngaitau, as you are, ko tō taha moeraki. And we're obviously talking about James Meagher here. Have you seen anything in here that signals an outcome coming down the pipeline for the people of Te Waiponamu? Because this is a new ministry that was kind of lauded, actually, by the Prime Minister when he announced that cabinet reshuffle.
So actually, no, I have not had a look specifically for Te Waiponamu. However, I suspect it fits into the bucket as per all the other equity groups, where if you have a need, you will be a part of a general pool and mainstreamed approach.
Flexible fund, universal funding. Yep, OK. Nō reire te iwi kia tauria ke tātou ki te te ato ngā māngai kōrero i Nina. She's the Vice President of Te Rūroa NZEI and tumuaki of Hayata Campus, a school in Christchurch in the suburb of Wainoni. Raewyn Himona joins us now live from Ōtautahi, Christchurch. Raewyn, tēnā koe. Thank you very much for your time. Education is your area of expertise. What do you think this budget says for you and also for the wider education community in terms of what the budget announcement was this year?
Okay, tēnā koutou te whānau. Ai, ka Raewyn Himona tēnā i tuku mahi ana kia koutou. He rangi pauri. I think it's a really sad day. Sad day for wahine, terrible day for wahine Māori, and our mokopuna will be struggling for years to come. I'm really disappointed and I'm really scared about what's going to be in front of our kids, our whānau, our hapori and our communities in the future.
Raywin, can I just pick you up on that and just explore that further if you don't mind? Do you not see anything in this budget? I mean, the government is saying that it's putting things into flexible funds, that there will be Māori outcomes in things like education. It said that specifically. The Minister of Finance said that before the announcement of the budget today. You're just not seeing any of that at all. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not seeing anything of that at all. You know, the proof is going to be in the data. Governments, no matter, come in and out, and it's always about data. But there is no data showing what success is going to look like. You know, success as Māori means listening to whānau voice and listening to the professions. You know, mana taurite, gender equity has gone for wahine Māori. Over 90,000 teachers in kaiako and ECE, kohanga reo, and kura kaupapa Māori and wharikura and all English medium schools has gone down the drain. 5 years working for wahine. You know, this is going to have a huge impact on education because as it is, it's so hard to retain our amazing educators. ECE and kohanga, there has been nothing in the budget that's saying that they're going to get anything. You know, you can put... they say there's $174 million or whatever's going to go in there, but the proof will be in the pudding of when we can actually see where that's going to go. Does it go in collecting data? It doesn't go into the hands of our whānau and in the mouths of our mokopuna. You know, education is the key to the future. Education is the key for our amazing leaders, and our tamariki are not going to have equitable access to education.
Raywin, tēnā koe i nā kōrero. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us live. I really appreciate your input and your perspective on this year's budget. E mihi ane hoa, ka nui te mihi ki a koe. That was Raywin Himona there, the Vice President of Te Rurua NZEI and the Tumuaki of Haiata campus, the school there in Wainoni, beautiful part of Ōtautahi, Christchurch. E mihi ana ki aia. Let's come back to our panel now. It won't be surprising, I think, Kapua, people are feeling a bit hurt. I mean, that's obvious from what we just heard from Raywin here today. E pāma mai ana.
Right, tino. And it's easy to see why, because again, your budget is an annual statement of where your priorities are, but the policy direction has been signalled since they took office of this new government. So there has been a significant amount of water run under the bridge for Māoridom, as we know. There has been a targeted approach to te tiriti o Waitangi, to kaupapa Māori, that has not been positive for Māoridom. And then you've got a budget that does continue that trend, unfortunately.
Shamabil, has the floor been opened up here to opposition parties? We saw an alternative green budget being presented in the last week. The Labour Party, though, has been very quiet in terms of specific policy. There is talk about potentially a capital gains tax, and I think that was referenced by the Minister of Finance in her presentation, her budget presentation today, about, you know, potentially new taxes and all those kinds of things that the national government always levels upon Labour. Has this opened up space, do you think, for Labour to make some key policy statements here as an opposition party that it can start to build on before the election next year?
Yeah, look, it's too early for the oppositions to be really laying out their policies. So for Greens, because they're relatively small, they do have to kind of try and get some airspace before it all happens. So for the Labour Party, I wouldn't expect them to do anything until it's very close to the next election. But this does open up a much bigger conversation around not just about what taxes we pay, but a more important conversation about what public services do we want. Yeah. And I think they're slightly different conversations because the services we want is what is paid for by taxes. And, you know, it's a collective good. It's not an individual thing. It feels like so much of the conversation is so individual at the moment, right? Yep. What do I get out of it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, but the current government will talk about private-public partnerships that is looking at, particularly roading and infrastructure and those kinds of things, as a way of paying for some services. But in key service areas, the likes of which have been mentioned in this survey, you know, health and well-being, or well-being, health, economic well-being, those kinds of things, which many of the Whakaata Māori survey respondents said this government was failing on. Do you not think that there could be an opportunity there for some type of policy to start to be developed and potentially presented before the end of this year, so people can, like, think about them, talk about them?
Well, I mean, the political calculus is always difficult to project, but if you look at what's been happening is When it comes to things like housing, for example, where I do a lot of work, there's a lot of talk about these big policy changes around resource management changes and things like that. And those are actually good things because we want to improve those things. But at the same time, they're taking money away from, all those really needed services around social housing, around kaingora, those kinds of things. And what it means is that while they're focusing on one type of response, they're giving up on some other things that actually help people as well. So it's that inability to kind of do both things at the same time, chew gum and walk at the same time. And that's what we're seeing. And I think there has to be an alternative vision that's painted by our politicians, because at the moment it feels like we're choosing between a much of a muchness. And we do need to have a really good alternative that feels more optimistic rather than we're just going to do less and it's going to get better.
I think that's a really key point. I know we're going to look at some particular vote spending areas soon, but on the optimism bit, that's the bit that it feels like there's a lot missing right now.
Yeah, and I try to be an optimist, looking for the silver lining. And to your question earlier, Julian, about what's in it in terms of social and well-being initiatives, often I focus on the social investment approach, which is still building, but potentially can have great legs in the future. But that does not discount the need for services now. And that's what I'm really worried about. And also the capability gap required to bring our service providers up to standard to participate in the social investment approach, which is highly data-driven. So I do think there are silver linings, but they're just budding.
But absolutely, and I think the social investment was a really big winner out of this budget, where they're relatively small, but they've seen a big increase. And that's well and good. But at the same time, the fact that you're going to be reducing funding for things like arts and culture and sports, those are also really important things that actually create social cohesion and social engagement and all those necessary things for our society to work well. So it feels like what we're doing is, we'll do this specific thing that we like, but all these other things that are working well at the moment, we don't want to do that. And therein lies the challenges. In any budget, it's this thing about these new announcements versus all the existing things that are being defunded or reduced in funding. And that's where the concern is for me, is can we really have social investment if we don't have the broad apparatus of society working well?
Yeah, the talk of this being a no BS budget makes it sound like a very cold, calculated approach to money and figures and data, not about people outcomes. That's what it feels like.
But also it feels like they're saying as if government is this very active, I alone type actor, that we just go in and do certain things and it happens in isolation. Of course it doesn't. Government is actually a fairly large part of society. They deliver lots of paid and unpaid services, about a third of the economy. But so many of the services they provide, there is no alternative. Right? And if they step away from those things, nothing will replace it. And so there is a challenge in my mind, is government is not always about doing things, it's also about creating spaces and conversations and connecting things up, the coordination, cohesion that takes place. I don't think that's the bit that they want to do.
I do think there is a good question in here, and a lot of Māori organisations and Māori communities are also asking themselves, what is the boundary of government versus what is the role of community and Māori organisations to take responsibility for various things. I mean, we've often grown up on the narrative around devolution. We want more control back, but we need the resources to go back to communities to be able to empower them to deliver, especially if they're cutting public services. So I think it's one of those debates where it's going down a particular track currently. However, there is potential for opportunity for Māori and other participants if we understand and the power and resource flows with the responsibilities.
But isn't it the disconnect between the rhetoric of devolution, which we heard in the elections that came through, but the actions are still very centralising? And if you want to do devolution, like you said, it's not going to happen immediately because that capacity and capability doesn't exist in our communities yet. So we actually need to make an investment for that to be able to work. So I feel like we kind of have these high kind of theoretical kind of conversations that are absolutely correct. Yes, devolution is a good thing. We know with whānau model and others that if you do it well, it has really great outcomes. But are we actually doing that? Is that what you see in this budget? Do you see that in the actions and the policies that are being pursued? I don't.
And that's the question I think that we need to grapple with as communities, because you do have a lot of Māori organisations welcoming some of these initiatives because they do see it as a power shift. But true power shift comes with resources and control.
That's
and
right.
Accountability will always sit with government currently.
Tahu Pōtiki always used to talk about the Article 3 line, right? That where the government or the Crown abdicates its responsibility, then it is the responsibility potentially of iwi organisations and others to step in and fill the void. Is that what we're going to see, Kapua? And is that a way of actually letting the Crown off the hook?
So, and this is my fear, and this is the thing around the trust in public institutions. Do we trust them to let go of control of the things that actually give empowered opportunity to communities and organisations, or are they letting good control of things which are just cheaper for them to let go? It's a question, but you can see a fundamental shift in the system happening now, and I worry too. I'm not,
We're very good at devolving responsibilities, but not necessarily funding and ability to raise funding and those kinds of things. So the power imbalance is still very strong, but also when you've got a country of 5 and a bit million people, it is really hard to devolve everything, and maybe we shouldn't. But where do we find the right balance when things are not working? So look, to my mind, it's not so much the devolution in and of itself is a bad thing or a good thing, it's just how do we do it? Because we talk about it a lot, but we're not doing it effectively outside of some specific examples.
And I also think it's the pace at which we are doing things in this current period of time, which is challenging, and bringing the stakeholders and community along that journey hasn't quite happened to the optimal
Hey,
levels.
I'm trying to cut things off here.
Sorry.
Kāre hata wai, I thought I don't want to get that. You didn't notice my subtle hand.
I've been taught to ignore it.
I really do appreciate the expertise and the insights and the perspectives. Ia kura ngatira shomapeu iaku a kapuisma. Tēnā korua, ia korua korero. Thank you very much for your time as well. And also thanks to all of those who are part of the team. Kia hati e ngai iwi kua tāeri ake. Ke te kōrero, te ke te wānanga, te ke te whawhau hiara, e te mutu e te rau. E te Ao Māori News me te pūpū tahitanga o te Ao Pāpāho Māori i kawe ake i te Tahua 2022 Ka nui te mihi kia koutou katoa. Thank you for joining our coverage today. On behalf of our expert panellists, our reporters across the country, and our production team here at Whakaata Māori and Te Ao Māori News, kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa paunu te Moana, kia tere te kārohirohi ti he wa mauri ora, kia tātou katoa.
Aotearoa, ho mai te ha, o tōku